The shot that changed everything. The jungle was too quiet. Ethan Carter didn't trust silence, not in a place like this. Thick fog curled around the trees, and strange glowing plants cast eerie shadows on the damp ground. His boots made almost no sound as he stepped carefully over the roots and fallen leaves. The air smelled of rain, earth, and something metallic, like blood. His squad was close behind him, their rifles raised. They had been hunting for hours, tracking a beast that had been attacking supply convoys. The reports were terrifying. It was fast, strong, and completely merciless. It tore through metal like paper, and no one who had seen it had lived to describe it. Ethan's hands tightened around his rifle. He had fought in 100 battles, but something about this mission felt wrong. It was like the jungle itself was watching them. A branch snapped somewhere ahead. Ethan's heart pounded. His finger rested on the trigger as he scanned the darkness. Something moved in the mist, low to the ground, barely visible. Then he saw them. Eyes. They glowed a deep, unnatural blue, staring at him through the fog. A shadowy figure crouched in the undergrowth, half hidden. Claws. Fangs. He couldn't tell, but instinct screamed danger. Ethan didn't hesitate. He aimed. He fired. The gunshot echoed through the jungle. The figure jerked back and collapsed. For a moment, everything was still. Then, as the mist began to clear, Ethan stepped forward to see what he had shot. His breath caught in his throat. It wasn't a beast. It was a girl. She lay on the ground, her body trembling. Dark blue blood seeped from a wound in her shoulder. She wasn't human, that much was clear. Her skin was smooth and slightly luminous, like the leaves around her. But she wasn't a monster either. Ethan had seen 1,000 alien species in his time as a soldier. Some were friendly. Some were enemies. Some were dangerous. But he had never seen anything like her. Her eyes fluttered open. They weren't filled with anger. Not even fear. Just pain. Then, in a weak, trembling voice, she spoke. "Why did you hurt me?" Ethan froze. His grip on the rifle tightened. She spoke English. That didn't make sense. No one had said the beasts could talk. No one had said they were people. Heavy boots pounded the ground behind him. His squad had heard the shot. They were coming. Ethan looked down at the girl. She was struggling to breathe. Her lips parted like she wanted to say more, but she was too weak. His squad leader, Sergeant Briggs, appeared at his side. He took one look at the wounded girl and grinned. "Nice shot, Carter. Let's put it out of its misery." Ethan's stomach twisted. He wasn't sure why. He should have felt relief. They had hunted the creature. He had shot it. That was the mission. Then why did it feel so wrong? The girl tried to sit up, but the pain was too much. A single tear rolled down her cheek. Ethan swallowed hard. This wasn't a monster. This was a mistake. "Carter, you hearing me?" Briggs asked, raising his rifle. Ethan hesitated. His mind raced. If he let them kill her, he could go back to camp, sleep peacefully, and forget this ever happened. But if he stopped them... Briggs was watching him now, suspicious. "You good, soldier?" Ethan's pulse thundered in his ears. The girl's blue eyes met his again. They weren't pleading, just waiting, as if she already knew how this would end. He didn't think. He just acted. Before anyone could stop him, Ethan dropped to one knee, scooped the girl into his arms, and stood. The squad tensed. "What the hell are you doing?" Briggs demanded. Ethan met his gaze. "She's not a beast." Briggs's face darkened. "That thing has killed our people." "Has it?" Ethan challenged. "Or did we just assume?" No one spoke. The jungle around them felt even heavier. The girl let out a weak breath, her body limp against Ethan's chest. Briggs lifted his rifle. "Drop it, Carter. That's an order." Ethan tightened his hold. If he handed her over, she would die. If he fought back, so would he. His mind raced for a way out. There had to be another choice. Then the girl's fingers brushed against his arm. "Run," she whispered. And Ethan Carter ran. A mistake that cannot be undone. Ethan Carter's heart pounded like a war drum as he sprinted through the dense jungle, the alien girl limp in his arms. Behind him, shouts rang through the mist. Heavy boots thudded against the ground. Weapons clicked, primed to fire. His own squad was hunting him now. Branches lashed at his face, cutting shallow lines across his skin. He barely noticed. His focus was on the girl. Her body was warm but growing colder. Her breath came in ragged, uneven gasps. She was fading. Ethan's training screamed at him. "You're making a mistake." He was abandoning his mission, disobeying direct orders, and betraying his squad. He was throwing away everything for an alien he had met only minutes ago. But something deeper, something beyond logic, told him this was right. She wasn't a beast. She wasn't an enemy. She was a victim, and he had almost been her executioner. A plasma bolt sizzled through the air, searing past his shoulder and striking the tree ahead. Bark exploded in a fiery burst. Ethan ducked, shifting his grip on the girl as he pushed forward. "Carter," Briggs' voice boomed from behind. "Stop. You have 3 seconds before we open fire for real." Ethan didn't stop. He adjusted his grip on his rifle, holding it in one hand while the girl's weight pressed against his chest. She was murmuring something, but her voice was too weak to understand. 3 seconds. 2. A low growl rumbled through the jungle. Not human. Not the girl. Something else. The moment Ethan heard it, instinct kicked in. He dove forward, twisting his body to shield the girl as another plasma bolt flew past. Then, chaos. A massive dark shape burst from the trees. It moved too fast for Ethan to process, a blur of twisting shadows and shimmering skin. It crashed into the soldiers behind him, sending them sprawling. Screams filled the air. Gunfire erupted. Ethan hit the ground hard, rolling over the girl to shield her from the debris. He barely had time to register the creature's form. It was big, standing on 2 legs, but its body rippled like liquid, shifting in and out of view like it was part of the jungle itself. A guardian. Not a beast. A protector. Briggs roared orders. "Fire. Take it down on." Ethan forced himself to his feet, his grip on the girl tightening. The guardian let out an ear-splitting roar, sending a shockwave through the trees. Branches snapped, the ground cracked, and suddenly, the jungle was alive. Vines slithered down like whips, wrapping around weapons. Trees twisted and moved, blocking escape routes. The jungle was fighting back. Ethan didn't question it. He turned and ran, pushing through the shifting landscape. He didn't know where he was going. He only knew he couldn't stop. The underground refuge. Minutes stretched into eternity. Ethan's lungs burned. His arms ached from carrying the girl. Still, he ran. The sounds of battle faded behind him, swallowed by the jungle. Eventually, the trees thinned, opening to a clearing bathed in soft, bioluminescent light. Strange flowers pulsed with an inner glow. The air was thick with mist, swirling around Ethan's legs. Ahead, a massive stone archway loomed, overgrown with vines. The entrance to something ancient. The girl stirred in his arms. Her eyelids fluttered open. "Go. Inside," she whispered. Ethan hesitated, then stepped forward. The moment he crossed the threshold, a sudden wave of warmth passed over his skin, like stepping through an invisible barrier. Then, silence. No sounds of pursuit. No gunfire. Nothing. Ethan exhaled sharply and turned his gaze forward. Inside the cavern, faint lights flickered along the walls. Not artificial, but natural. The rock pulsed with soft blue veins of energy, casting eerie patterns along the floor. And then he saw them. Dozens of figures, barely visible in the dim glow. More of her kind. Some were young, barely more than children. Others were old, their skin lined with glowing tattoos. They stepped back cautiously as Ethan entered, their eyes flicking between him and the wounded girl in his arms. A deep, commanding voice broke the silence. "You bring her here, human, after spilling her blood." Ethan turned sharply. An older male stepped forward. He was taller than the girl, his skin a deeper shade of blue. His eyes, though ancient, held the same intensity Ethan had seen in hers. He wore flowing garments woven from what looked like living vines, pulsating softly with energy. The girl stirred again. "Father," she whispered. Ethan's grip tightened. "Father." The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just any alien. She was the daughter of their leader. And he had shot her. The older alien took a step closer, his gaze burning into Ethan's. "You made a grave mistake, human. Now we will decide if you live long enough to fix it." Ethan swallowed hard. He had expected anger, hatred, but there was something else in the leader's eyes. Not just fury, but sorrow. Because this wasn't the first time. Humans had been killing them for a long time, and Ethan had just become one more soldier in a war he never even knew existed. The truth hidden in her eyes. Ethan stood frozen under the weight of the alien leader's gaze. The cavern pulsed with a quiet, eerie energy, and dozens of eyes bore into him, some filled with fear, others with anger. The girl, Nyx, stirred in his arms again, her breathing weak but steady. Despite her injury, she gripped his sleeve with surprising strength. "Father, don't." Her voice was faint, but the plea was clear. Her father's expression darkened. He raised his hand, and a low hum rippled through the air. The very walls of the cavern seemed to respond, roots slithering, the soft blue veins in the stone pulsing brighter. Ethan's instincts screamed at him to run, but he held his ground. He had already made one mistake tonight. He wasn't about to make another. The alien leader, Eruth, stepped forward, his piercing gaze never leaving Ethan's face. "You spilled her blood, human. That alone demands judgment." Ethan's grip on Nyx tightened. He was exhausted, injured, and surrounded by beings who could kill him in an instant. But he forced himself to stand taller. "It was a mistake," he said, his voice hoarse but steady. "I thought she was something else. I didn't know." Eruth's expression remained unreadable. "You didn't know." He let the words hang in the air. Then, after a pause, he said, "And now that you do." Ethan glanced down at Nyx. She was watching him with those strange, luminescent eyes, filled with pain, but also something else, something unspoken. He looked back at Eruth. "Now, I want to fix it." A murmur spread through the gathered aliens, whispers rippling like waves. Eruth studied Ethan for a long moment, then turned sharply. "Come with me." The walls of the cavern shifted, opening into a deeper passage. The way the stone obeyed him made Ethan's skin prickle, like the entire place was alive. Ethan hesitated, then followed. The Hall of Echoes. The passage led to a massive underground chamber, its ceiling lost in shadow. Strange, glowing symbols lined the walls, swirling with an energy Ethan had never seen before. In the center of the room, a pillar of liquid light shimmered, pulsing with slow, rhythmic waves. Eruth gestured toward it. "Step forward, human." Ethan tensed. "Why?" Eruth's expression didn't change. "Because I want you to understand." Ethan hesitated, then took a step closer. The pillar of light flickered. As soon as his fingertips brushed against it, his vision exploded. A nightmare of memories. Ethan was not himself anymore. He was seeing through another's eyes, Nyx's eyes. Pain, fear, the sound of gunfire. He saw humans in armor, hunting through the jungle. He saw Nyx and others of her kind hiding, fleeing, whispering desperate prayers to the living trees that shielded them. He felt her heartbeat quicken as she ran, saw through her eyes as she watched her own mother get cut down by plasma fire. Not because she had attacked, because she had tried to surrender. Nyx had been running ever since, running, hiding, surviving. Until tonight. Until Ethan. He saw himself through her eyes, standing over her, rifle raised, finger on the trigger. She had seen death in his eyes. Then, pain, darkness, and then, warmth. She had expected to die, but instead, she had woken up in his arms. And for the first time in her life, a human had saved her instead of killing her. Ethan stumbled back as the visions faded. His breath was ragged, his heart pounding. "We never attacked first." Eroth's voice was quiet, but sharp. "We only ran. We only hid. But you humans called us monsters. And so, we became prey." Ethan clenched his fists. His head was spinning. Had everything he believed been a lie? All the briefings, the mission reports, the stories of the beasts that roamed this planet, all of it was a lie. His squad hadn't been hunting monsters. They had been hunting refugees, and he had been one of the hunters. Ethan swallowed hard, then looked up at Eroth. "Tell me how to fix this." Eroth studied him, his expression unreadable. Then he turned to Nyx, who had been watching silently. She stepped forward, her wounds still healing, and placed a hand on Ethan's chest. "You already started. The war nobody knew existed." Ethan spent the next few hours in the underground city. He saw things no human had ever seen. Entire families living in fear, their numbers dwindling. They had no weapons, no way to fight back, only their connection to the jungle, which shielded them as best it could. Ethan listened as they told him what humanity had done, not out of malice, but out of ignorance. The colonists had never questioned the orders they were given. The creatures of the jungle were labeled as hostile, so the soldiers treated them as such. There was no war, only slaughter. And now the human army was preparing for something worse, a final purge. "They'd found our last refuge," Eroth said grimly. "Your squad called for reinforcements before you ran. They will be here within a day." Ethan's stomach twisted. An entire military division was coming, and he was the only one who knew the truth. He could go back, try to warn his people, convince them to stop. Or he could stay and fight for the very people he was once sent to kill. Nyx stepped closer, her eyes searching his. "You already saved me once. Will you help us now?" Ethan didn't hesitate this time. He looked at her, then at Eroth. Then he spoke the words that sealed his fate. "I'll fight for you. Escape or die trying." The weight of Ethan Carter's decision settled deep in his chest. He had always followed orders, trusting his commanders, trusting the mission. But now, for the first time in his life, he knew the truth. And that truth demanded rebellion. The underground city was silent, holding its breath as its people watched him. Eroth studied Ethan carefully. "You say you will fight for us, human. But do you truly understand what that means?" Ethan nodded. "It means standing against my own." Nyx's eyes widened slightly, and something unreadable flickered across her face. Eroth sighed. "The humans won't show mercy. They will burn this jungle to the ground." Ethan clenched his fists. "Then we stop them before they get the chance." Eroth exchanged a glance with Nyx. Then he turned and gestured for Ethan to follow. The weapons of a forgotten race. They moved through winding tunnels, past glowing roots that pulsed softly as if alive. Finally, they reached a massive underground chamber. Ethan stopped short. It was a graveyard. Rows of ancient, rusted weapons lined the walls, blades fused with organic material, strange firearms that hummed faintly, armor that looked half metal, half living. Nyx moved past him and ran her hand over a nearby weapon. It came alive at her touch, the metal shifting, reshaping itself into something sleeker, deadlier. "Our people once fought," she murmured, almost to herself. "Long ago, before we chose to hide." Eroth placed a hand on the wall. A section of it pulsed, then slid away, revealing a map of the jungle, illuminated in soft blue light. Ethan frowned. "This isn't just a hiding place, is it?" Eroth's gaze was heavy. No, it was a fortress. Before we surrendered to silence, we stood against invaders for generations. Ethan turned to Nyx. You said you only ran, that you never fought back. Nyx hesitated, because fighting back only made them kill us faster. A beat of silence. Then, softly, Ethan asked, "And if I tell you that running isn't an option anymore?" Nyx looked at him, her glowing eyes troubled. Eroth stepped forward. "You have a plan, human." Ethan nodded. "I do. A suicide mission, or the only chance." Ethan studied the map, tracing the route with his fingers. The human army wasn't just bringing soldiers, they were bringing airstrikes, drones, and mechs. They wouldn't fight a ground battle. They would wipe the jungle from orbit. "We can't win a full war," Ethan admitted. "But we don't need to. We just need to delay them, long enough to expose the truth." Eroth folded his arms. "And how you plan to do that?" Ethan exhaled sharply. "By making sure they never launch the attack." He pointed to a small forward command post near the jungle's edge. "If we destroy their command center, we cut their communications. No targeting data. No orbital strike." Asterisk asterisk. Eroth raised an eyebrow. "And you believe this will work?" Ethan smirked grimly. "I don't need belief. I just need one hell of a distraction." Nyx's eyes widened slightly. "You want to lead an attack?" Ethan shrugged. "Why not? I already started a war by accident. Might as well finish it." Eroth let out a deep chuckle, shaking his head. "You are either the bravest human we have ever met, or the most foolish." Ethan grinned. "Maybe both." The battle begins. That night, the jungle came alive. Ethan moved like a ghost, leading the small strike team toward the human forward command post. They were using stealth tech, small devices Nyx's people had developed before their kind abandoned war. The night sky burned with the glow of incoming dropships. The full invasion force was almost here. They had one shot. Nyx moved beside him, her fingers twitching as the strange organic rifle in her hands reshaped itself for a better grip. Ethan looked at her. "You don't have to come." Nyx smirked. "After all you've done, I'm not letting you have all the fun." Ethan chuckled despite himself. Then, an explosion rocked the jungle. The attack had begun. In the distance, Ethan could see the humans reacting, shouting, scrambling for weapons. They hadn't expected a fight. He lifted his stolen human rifle and took a deep breath. It was time. The fall of the command post. They struck fast and hard. Ethan and Nyx moved like shadows, weaving through the chaos as the jungle itself seemed to rebel against the human forces. Trees lashed out, roots burst through the ground. Mist swallowed entire squads. For the first time in history, Nyx's people fought back. Ethan reached the command center just as a group of human officers were desperately trying to call for the orbital strike. One of them, Briggs, Ethan's former commander. Briggs turned, shock flashing across his face. "Carter, what the hell?" Ethan didn't hesitate. He fired first. Briggs dropped, clutching his leg. Chaos erupted. Nyx darted past Ethan and slammed a small pulse charge onto the control panel. Fire in the hole. Ethan grabbed her and dove behind cover as the explosives detonated. The entire command center erupted into flames. The human fleet above had lost their targeting systems. No orbital strike. The jungle was safe. For now. The final confrontation. Smoke filled the air. The sounds of battle faded. The jungle had won this round, but the war wasn't over. Briggs groaned, trying to push himself up. His face twisted in fury. "You're a traitor, Carter." Ethan stared at him. "No, I just finally started thinking for myself." Nyx stepped forward, staring down at Briggs. "You killed my people without ever asking why." Briggs coughed, glaring up at her. "You're just animals." Nyx's glowing eyes flickered with something deep and unreadable. She lifted a hand, and for a moment, The jungle itself seemed to react to her anger. The vines tightened. The air grew heavy. Ethan saw the temptation in her face. Revenge. She had every right to end Briggs. But instead, she let out a slow breath and stepped back. Ethan met her gaze. She had made her choice. And so had he. The war is just beginning. The jungle was safe for now, but Ethan knew the truth. The human fleet wasn't going to stop. They would send more soldiers, more fire. And Ethan, he was now a traitor in their eyes. But as he looked around, at Nyx, at the people who had once been hunted like animals, at the jungle that had finally fought back, he knew one thing for certain. He had chosen the right side. Ethan turned to Nyx. "What's next?" She smiled faintly. "Now." She turned to the jungle, her eyes gleaming. "Now, we make them afraid. The hunter becomes the hunted." The night was far from over. Smoke still clung to the air, and the distant echoes of retreating human forces mixed with the rhythmic hum of the jungle. Ethan Carter stood at the smoldering ruins of the human command center, breathing heavily. His pulse pounded in his ears. His hands trembled. Whether from exhaustion or the weight of his decision, he wasn't sure. He was a traitor to his own kind now. And the war was far from over. Nyx stood beside him, silent, her glowing blue eyes fixed on the horizon, where the last of the human ships disappeared into the sky. Their mission had been a success. The orbital strike had been stopped. But Ethan knew this was just the beginning. The humans wouldn't let this go. They would come back, angrier, stronger, and ready to burn the jungle to the ground. Ethan turned to Eroth, Nyx's father, who was surveying the battlefield with unreadable eyes. "They'll be back," Ethan said, voice hoarse. Eroth nodded. "And next time, they will not underestimate us." Nyx folded her arms. "We should move now. Take the fight to them before they return in force." Ethan hesitated. A direct attack on the human military outpost. That was suicide. The jungle had given them an edge this time, but humans adapted fast. Next time, they'd come prepared. But then again, so would he. Ethan exhaled sharply. "If we're going to survive, we need more than just a defense." He turned to Eroth. "We need allies." Eroth raised an eyebrow. "And where do you propose to find them?" Ethan clenched his jaw. In the last place anyone would expect. The human side. The plan that shouldn't work. The underground city bustled with quiet urgency. The survivors, once fearful and withdrawn, now moved with purpose. They had seen the battle. They had seen that humans could bleed too. For the first time, the hunted had become the hunters. Ethan stood inside what passed for a war room, a deep chamber with pulsing bioluminescent vines forming a massive interactive map of the jungle. Eroth, Nyx, and several other elders surrounded him. He pointed to a section of the map where a small human military outpost blinked. "That's our next target." One of the elders frowned. "You wish to strike the humans again." Ethan shook his head. "Not strike. Infiltrate." Eroth narrowed his eyes. "Explain." Ethan exhaled slowly. "We don't have the numbers for a full war, but we don't need them. What we need is information. That outpost is a communications hub. It handles supply routes, reinforcement schedules, and most importantly, military broadcasts." Nyx's eyes flickered with understanding. "You want to send a message." Ethan nodded. "Not just any message. A message that will turn their own against them." The infiltration begins. The plan was reckless. Stupid, even, but it was their only chance. Under the cover of night, Ethan led a small strike team, Nyx and 4 other elite warriors, toward the human outpost. Unlike the last time, this mission required stealth, not brute force. Ethan had studied the outpost's patrol routes. He knew when the guards rotated, when the sensor drones recharged, when the supply convoys arrived. It wasn't easy. His knowledge was already outdated. The humans had changed their patterns after the last attack. They were learning. Still, they had one advantage: Nyx's abilities. She moved like a shadow, blending seamlessly with the jungle. At times, she would place a hand on the ground, and the earth itself seemed to shift, guiding them past security checkpoints. Ethan wasn't sure if it was technology or something else entirely. He didn't ask. They'd reached the perimeter fence, a towering metal wall reinforced with pulse barriers. Touching it would vaporize anything living. Ethan crouched low. This is where it gets tricky. Nyx didn't hesitate. She placed a small, organic-looking device onto the fence. It pulsed once, then melted into the metal, spreading like liquid. Within seconds, a section of the barrier simply dissolved, opening a silent gap just large enough for them to slip through. Ethan shook his head in amazement. "Remind me to stop underestimating you." Nyx smirked. "Remind me to stop saving your life." They slipped inside. The truth no one knew. The outpost was smaller than the command center, but more heavily fortified. Soldiers patrolled in pairs, and combat drones hovered in defensive formations. Ethan led the way to the comms building, where encrypted transmissions from the main fleet were stored. If they could access it, they could send their own message, one that every human soldier in the sector would hear. Nyx and the others stayed behind to watch for guards while Ethan slipped inside. The room was empty, save for rows of flickering monitors displaying fleet activity, casualty reports, and high-level directives. Ethan's heart stopped when he saw one file in particular. Project Sealy ANC, Phase 2. He clicked it open. What he saw made his blood run cold. This wasn't just about wiping out the jungle. The humans weren't just clearing land for colonies. They were testing a bioweapon, one designed to exterminate an entire species, not just Nexus people, but everything on this planet. The jungle, the creatures, the air itself would be poisoned beyond repair. Ethan clenched his fists, his stomach twisted in disgust. They weren't fighting a war. They were covering up a massacre. He didn't have time to think. He plugged a data spike into the console, downloading everything. Then he opened a secure broadcast channel. This was the moment that would change everything. He activated his helmet's voice modulator, disguising his voice. Then, with a deep breath, he spoke into the microphone. To every soldier in the Terran fleet, this is not a war. This is a slaughter. He uploaded the classified files directly into the message. Every soldier, pilot, and officer would see the truth. You were told we are fighting monsters. You were told this world is dangerous. But the real danger isn't the enemy. It's our own leaders. Ethan's pulse pounded. If he was lucky, this would create chaos. Soldiers would question their orders, maybe even refuse to fight. If he was unlucky, he had just signed his own death warrant. The alarms sound. The second the file upload completed, the alarm blared through the base. Ethan swore under his breath. He ripped the data spike free and bolted for the exit. Outside, Nyx and the others were already in motion, neutralizing the guards before they could call for reinforcements. "They know we're here," Ethan shouted. Nyx grabbed his wrist. "Then let's leave before they catch us." They ran. Sirens wailed. Soldiers swarmed. The sky burned with the glow of incoming dropships. Ethan knew they weren't escaping unnoticed. But it didn't matter, because the message was out. Now the war wasn't just between the jungle and the humans. Now the humans were turning on each other. And for the first time in history, the truth was on their side. The uprising begins. The jungle was no longer silent. The distant hum of incoming dropships vibrated in the air, sending a fresh wave of tension through Ethan's muscles as he sprinted through the thick foliage. Behind him, Nyx and the other warriors kept pace, their movements fluid, almost in sync with the jungle itself. The moment his broadcast had gone out, the entire military outpost had erupted into chaos. Alarms blared, soldiers scrambled. Confusion rippled through the ranks. But Ethan knew that wouldn't last. Command would recover, orders would be reinforced. The extermination would resume. Unless they stopped it. Now. Nyx suddenly skidded to a halt. Her glowing eyes flicked skyward. "They're moving faster than I expected," she murmured. Ethan followed her gaze. Through gaps in the jungle canopy, the silhouettes of Terran warships loomed against the dark sky. Dozens of them. Some remained in high orbit, but others were descending. Dropships, troop carriers, gunships. The counterattack had already begun. Ethan's stomach twisted. "We don't have time to retreat. We have to disrupt them before they deploy." Nyx gave him a sharp look. "And how do you plan to fight an entire fleet?" Ethan exhaled, already forming the answer in his mind. "We don't fight it. We divide it." The fractured army. By now, Ethan's broadcast had reached thousands of human soldiers across the fleet, and judging by the scrambled chatter coming through his stolen earpiece, the seeds of doubt had been planted. Some units were hesitating. Some were even refusing orders. And some were starting to fight back. Ethan tuned into the comms as he ran. "I don't care what High Command says. I'm not murdering civilians. Who gave these orders? We were told this was a war, not a cleansing. They're lying to us, and I won't be part of it." His message was working. The army was splitting apart. But it wasn't enough. They needed more. Nyx ran alongside him, her eyes sharp. "What now, Carter?" Ethan smirked grimly. "We're about to steal a ship, hijacking the enemy." Ethan's plan was reckless, but at this point, reckless was all they had. Using Nyx's ability to bend the jungle to their will, they reached an open clearing near the human landing zone. Several troop carriers had landed, heavy armored ships designed to deploy soldiers and mechs. They weren't built for stealth, but they were fast. Ethan's heart pounded as he analyzed the landing zone. 15 soldiers, a mechanized walker, several automated turrets. Impossible odds. Nyx glanced at him. "You have that look again." Ethan adjusted his stolen rifle. "What look?" "The look of someone about to do something stupid." Ethan grinned. "Then let's make it count." The attack that shouldn't have worked. The plan was insane. Ethan and Nyx would draw the soldiers away while the others hacked the ship's control panel and stole it from under their noses. But first, they needed a distraction. A big one. Ethan reached into his pack and pulled out a small spherical device, a pulse grenade. The kind that fried electronics and caused temporary blindness. He clicked the activation switch. The grenade hummed softly. One shot. One chance. With a deep breath, Ethan lobbed the grenade straight at the mechanized walker. It hit dead center and detonated. A shockwave of energy erupted, scrambling the mech's targeting systems. The massive machine stumbled backward, its sensors overloaded. The soldiers panicked. What the hell? That was their opening. Nyx moved like a shadow, vanishing into the mist. Moments later, the jungle came alive. Vines lashed out, ensnaring soldiers. The ground trembled as roots burst upward, throwing men off their feet. Ethan moved quickly, taking precise shots, non-lethal where possible. In the chaos, Nyx's warriors slipped past the fighting, reaching the troop carrier's control panel. Ethan heard the crackle of static in his earpiece. "We're in." The stolen ship came to life. Ethan grinned. "Then let's get the hell out of here." The sky burns. The moment the troop carrier lifted off, the rest of the fleet reacted. Gunships roared to life. Anti-aircraft cannons swiveled toward them. The humans had realized they'd been robbed. Ethan bolted for the ramp, Nyx right beside him. The ship's engines screamed as it gained altitude. The missile lock alarm blared. "We've got incoming," shouted one of the warriors at the controls. Ethan reached the cockpit just in time to see a missile streaking toward them. Nyx didn't hesitate. She pressed her palm to the ship's hull, and the metal itself rippled. The missile curved mid-flight, missing them by inches. Ethan stared. "I'm not even gonna ask how you did that." Nyx smirked. "Good, because I'm not explaining." The stolen ship punched through the clouds, escaping the battlefield. But Ethan knew this was only temporary. The humans would track them. They had only bought time. And now it was time to strike back. The rebel fleet. Ethan knew the war couldn't be won on the ground. Not alone. If they wanted to stand a chance, they needed ships, fighters, weapons. They needed defectors. Luckily, Ethan had just created an army of them. As their stolen ship moved into deep space, he activated his comm unit again. To any soldier who still has a conscience, listen up. His voice echoed across the fleet. This war isn't what you were told. You've seen the proof. Now, you have a choice. Stay and fight for monsters, or fight with us. The comm remained silent for a long moment. Then, a single voice answered. This is Captain Draker of the Terran fleet. The voice was firm but tinged with doubt. I don't know who the hell you are, but you're right. We've seen enough. Give us a location. We'll talk. Ethan grinned. The revolution had begun. The battle that shook the galaxy. The stars stretched endlessly around them, but Ethan Carter didn't have time to admire the view. He stood in the cockpit of the stolen Terran troop carrier, staring at the growing swarm of blinking distress signals on his radar. They weren't just signals. They were humans, defecting from their own fleet. The revolution had begun. Behind him, Nyx leaned against the console, watching him carefully. You did it, she murmured. You turned their own soldiers against them. Ethan exhaled, running a hand through his sweat-dampened hair. Not enough of them. Because even with hundreds of defectors, the Terran High Command still controlled the largest fleet in the system, and they weren't going to sit back and watch their empire crumble. A deep, static-filled voice crackled through the comms. Attention, rebel forces. This is Admiral Kell of the Terran Armada. You have committed high treason against humanity. Surrender immediately or be annihilated. Ethan's fingers curled into fists. He recognized that voice. Kell wasn't just some faceless admiral. He was the one who had authorized the cleansing of the jungle. And now, he was coming to finish what he started. Ethan turned to Nyx. They're going to bomb your world out of existence. Nyx's gaze darkened, but her voice remained steady. Not if we stop them first. Ethan grinned. Now you're talking. The final battle was about to begin. The last stand of the jungle. The rebel fleet was outnumbered. Badly. Ethan knew it before he even saw the full force of the Terran Armada. Through the ship's scanners, he counted. 200+ warships. Dreadnought-class carriers. Orbital bombardment destroyers. A swarm of fighter squadrons. And on their side, 12 stolen ships. A handful of defecting warships. One dying planet. Nyx's people had never fought a full-scale space battle. They were warriors of the jungle, not the stars. But they had one thing the Terrans didn't. A living world willing to fight for them. Phase 1. The sky burns. Ethan took a deep breath, then activated the comms. Listen up. We're outnumbered, outgunned, and we're fighting a fleet that's bigger than entire planets. But you know what? A pause. They don't expect us to fight like hell. A low chuckle from Captain Draker, one of the defecting Terran officers. All right, Carter. Let's see what you've got. Ethan grinned. All ships, spread formation. Nyx, tell your people. Get the jungle ready. Nyx nodded, closing her eyes. The ground below them rumbled. And then the planet fought back. The trees moved, ancient roots twisting like titanic serpents, forming massive natural cannons that charged with energy. The mountains split open, revealing dormant defenses from a forgotten war. And from deep beneath the jungle, creatures, massive, living titans, rose from slumber. Ethan's heart pounded. All right, Kell. Let's see how you like fighting a planet. The battle began. Phase 2. The rebel fleet strikes back. The first wave of Terran bombers moved into position, prepping their payloads. But before they could fire, Nyx raised her hands. The mist thickened, coiling around the ships, blinding their targeting systems. The bombers panicked. "We've lost visuals. Sensors aren't working." Then, the jungle's energy cannons fired. Massive organic energy beams speared through the clouds, ripping through enemy ships like they were nothing. Ethan grinned. "Oh, this is fun." But the real battle was still ahead. The Terran dreadnoughts were moving into position, massive cannons aimed straight at the planet. Ethan's grin vanished. "We need to take out those heavy ships now." Phase 3. The spear that broke the giant. Ethan had one last card to play. The stolen troop carrier they were piloting was too small to take on a dreadnought. But it was fast. And if he got close enough. Nyx caught on instantly. "You're insane." Ethan strapped himself in. "You just figured that out." Nyx smirked. "I was hoping I was wrong." With that, Ethan punched the thrusters. The troop carrier rocketed toward the largest Terran dreadnought, weaving through incoming fire, barely dodging fighter squadrons. Alarms blared. Target locks screamed. Ethan kept going. Inside the ship, the rebels braced for impact. They were going to board a goddamn dreadnought. Phase 4. The battle inside the beast. The troop carrier smashed into the side of the dreadnought's hangar bay. Metal screamed. The ship shuddered. Ethan unstrapped and grabbed his weapon. "Move, move, move." They poured into the ship. Nyx, rebel soldiers, defecting humans, fighting through corridors, taking out security teams. They had one goal: take the bridge. They stormed through the halls of the enemy ship, plasma bolts flying, alarms blaring. Nyx moved like a ghost, taking down enemies with ruthless precision. Ethan blasted through the last set of doors and came face to face with Admiral Kale. The older man stood tall, calm even in the face of death. "You were a good soldier, Carter," Kale said. "A shame you never learned when to follow orders." Ethan raised his gun. "Yeah, well, turns out I had bad teachers." Kale smiled. "Then allow me to correct that mistake." And then he drew his own weapon. Phase 5. The duel that decided a war. The two men circled each other on the dreadnought's bridge. Kale was faster than Ethan expected. Precise. Calculated. A true warrior of the Terran fleet. But Ethan was desperate. And desperate men didn't fight clean. The fight was brutal. Blades clashed. Plasma bolts were dodged by inches. Both men bled. Then, Kale made a mistake. He lunged, expecting Ethan to dodge. Instead, Ethan charged straight in. He grabbed Kale's wrist, twisted, and drove a knife into his gut. Kale gasped, eyes wide. Ethan held him there. "This is for all the people you killed." Kale slumped. Ethan let him fall. The war was over. The aftermath. A new future. The dreadnought fell. With Kale dead, the Terran fleet fractured completely. Some ships surrendered. Others retreated. Ethan stood on the bridge, looking at Nyx. "It's over." Nyx nodded, her glowing eyes soft. "Not yet, but maybe soon." For the first time, the jungle was safe. For the first time, Ethan wasn't just a soldier. He was something more. A protector. A warrior. A rebel. And the war for the future had only just begun.